We begin this unit, Unit 10, by first looking at the final phase of the Peloponnesian War, called either the Ionian or the Decelean War. And as you can see there from my time brackets, we're looking at the last 9 years of the war. Just a quick recap, the Peloponnesian War began in the year 431. The first 10 years of the war, 431 to 421, were called the Akrotiri War. There was a peace of Nikias that was established, but of course it was a very unstable peace in 421. And that will last more or less officially until 413. But as I mentioned in earlier lectures, there is much drama, much turbulence just beneath the surface of that peace treaty. You're going to get the Battle of Mantinea in 418, in which Athenian volunteers, along with Argives, will fight against Spartans. But technically, the peace will hold from 421 until 413. In 413, when the Athenians are enmeshed in Sicily, that's the moment where the Spartans decide enough is enough and do declare war, declare that the Peace of Nikias is dead, and will begin operations. And of course, they'll begin operations by following the advice of one of the most interesting characters of the Peloponnesian conflict, and that is Alcibiades. And of course, Alcibiades was responsible, as we saw in the last unit on the Sicilian expedition. Alcibiades was responsible for crafting the plan and getting it approved by the Athenian assembly. And then he promptly jumps ship and heads to Sparta when he is accused of committing a religious sacrilege against the statues of the Hermes. And not wanting to wait for a trial, he will go to Sparta and begin advising the Spartans. And in a stroke, the Athenians are deprived of, despite his eccentricities, Alcibiades was considered one of the great commanders of Athens. So the Athenians are deprived of Alcibiades' strategic and tactical skill at the moment where they are disembarking in Sicily, ready to besiege the city-state of Syracuse. And Alcibiades, of course, is going to go to Sparta and begin advising them. So the Spartans will be the beneficiary of Alcibiades' strategic mind. And one of the things that Alcibiades will advise the Spartans to do is to, rather than invade Attica every year and then hang around for a month, 2 months, and then head back to Sparta, why not set up a permanent base of operations there and just harass the Athenians year round? And the Spartan king Agis decides, yeah, that's a pretty good idea, and the Spartans will march into Attica and take control of a town called Decelea and fortify it, and will remain there for the next roughly 9 years. So that's why, in part, this is called the Decelean phase of the war, because you have this really crucial development occurring right in Athens' own backyard. And so now we have seen that at the same moment that the Sicilian expedition has come to utter disaster, and you see the numbers up there on the slide, we think about 216 triremes and upwards of 45,000 men may have been lost on Sicily. This is a catastrophic blow for Athens. And now, at the same moment that news is filtering back of bad events going on in Sicily, the Spartans have taken up permanent residence in Decelea. So 413 is a very grim time for the Athenians. Now, in 412 BC, the situation will actually worsen for the Athenians when, again, inspired by the advice of Alcibiades, the Spartans reach out to the Persians for financial aid. Remember, the Spartan economy was never very robust, and Alcibiades convinces the Spartans that if they want to win this war, they're not going to need to challenge the Athenians directly in the Aegean, and that means going ship to ship, navy to navy, Problem is the Peloponnesian League doesn't have much of a navy. So, using Alcibiades as kind of a broker, the Spartans negotiate a treaty with the Persian Empire, by which the Persians will supply financial aid, and the Spartans will use that money to build a navy. And of course, we can see the Persians, recognizing that as long as the Greeks are fighting one another, they're not going to be messing with us. And if we weaken the Greeks by keeping this conflict going, then perhaps someday we'll be in a position to make a return. So the Persians have their own self-interest, and anyway, what we see here is the Ionian phase of the war beginning to unfold, because there will be many naval battles fought in the Ionian region of the Aegean, along the Ionian coast there, the islands. We do see that the presence now of a Spartan fleet in the Aegean is enough to get some of those Delian League allies to revolt against the Athenians. Most serious is a revolt that occurs on the island of Chios, which I've circled there in red. The Athenians recognize the seriousness of this and that revolts can be contagious, so they send a strong naval force to the nearby island of Samos, which I've highlighted here in yellow. And the Athenians are going to besiege Chios and try to force a surrender of that island before the situation worsens for them. So right away, you're seeing a whole new dynamic enter into this conflict, where the Spartans, who had never been, had been kind of landlubbers, had never been much of a naval presence, suddenly, with the aid of the Persian finances, are going to be able to challenge the Athenians. And for roughly 412 down to the surrender of Athens in 404, these 8 years, it's going to be a series of rather large-scale naval engagements. And these developments are also going to create much political intrigue, particularly in Athens. In 411, Alcibiades, who evidently had had an affair with the wife of the Spartan king Agus, the sources say he actually impregnated her, he becomes persona non grata in Sparta. The Spartans, particularly Agus, would like to see him dead. So Alcibiades needs to find a new home. And temporarily, he does find it with the Persians. He goes to the Persians and becomes a kind of an informal advisor to the satrap, to the governor of the Asia Minor region. And he is the one to basically give the Persians the idea to keep this war between the Greeks going as long as possible. That will safeguard Persian interests. And that, of course, will lead to the Persians financing the Spartans. So, but Alcibiades then in 411 makes a pitch to the Athenians, basically telling them, look, I can get the Persians on your side, Athens, and you can have access to Persian funds if you give up your democracy. The Persians are not comfortable dealing with democracies. They'd rather deal with oligarchies. And this is enough of kind of a prompt to trigger an oligarchic coup in Athens. There were a lot of high-powered aristoi in Athens who surely were dismayed at the course of the war. Certainly, the support that the Thetes gave to the Sicilian expedition is enough to get many upper-class Athenians, enough disgust to have these ideas of a coup swirling around in their head. And in 411 it actually happens, and for a few months you're going to have a rule of 400. And this rule of 400 is going to be made up, again, primarily of the very upper elite of Athenian society. 400 are the wealthiest, most powerful aristoi. But it doesn't have enough broad-based support, so within a few months, infighting by members of the 400 and a lack of political support in the broader Athenian populace causes this oligarchic regime to collapse. But it's replaced by another type of oligarchy called the 5,000. And this is much more moderate because it's made up of a broader segment of society. primarily men who would make up the cavalry or hoplite class. Again, property owners, but again, basically with a broader set of political goals. And this is where Thucydides' history ends. In 411, if you look at the last line of the history, it breaks off very abruptly. And we do know Thucydides lived to see the end of the war and the defeat of Athens, but he just didn't have time to finish his history. So from this point on, when we shift and look at the ancient sources available to continue our story, we can look at sources such as Diodorus Siculus, who wrote kind of a universal history. But interestingly, the Strassler people, Robert Strassler and his crew, have recently issued a landmark edition of the Hellenica, a history which picks up from 411, from the time Thucydides' history ends, going down to about the year 362. It's written by Xenophon, who we'll talk about a little later on, but it does provide a source that can keep us going. So, with Thucydides' history at an end, we can still pick up with events, and of course Alcibiades is going to continue to be at the center of events. He is recalled to service by the 5,000. They call him back because they do recognize he does have military skills, and he's put in control of an Athenian fleet, and relatively quickly he wins a very, very important naval victory at Cyzicus in 410. And the victory itself is won by the Thetes, the sailors, who are based on Samos, as I mentioned in a previous slide. They will demand after this victory that democracy be restored, and it will be. The 5,000 recognize the role of the Thetes and agree to a returning to full democracy. And one of the unfortunate byproducts of this, though, is after their defeat at Cyzicus, the Spartans seek peace. And the Athenian assembly, now restored to full democracy, evidently feeling its oats, feeling a little belligerent, rejects the peace overtures from Sparta. And this is going to be a fateful decision for Athens. So, from 410, with the victory at Cyzicus, the Athenian navy is going to go on a string of victories, and Alcibiades is going to be instrumental in pulling these victories off. Again, now commanding an Athenian fleet, he will secure for the Athenians both cities on either side of the Bosporus leading into the Black Sea, Byzantine and Chalcedon. And this is important because the Athenians were heavily reliant by this point from grain shipments coming out of the Black Sea. And if the Bosporus was closed, you would have significant problems getting those grain shipments to Athens. So again, very important victories led by Alcibiades in 408. And in 407, he actually returns to Athens and is greeted with a great deal of fanfare. So, there are second acts in Athenian political life, evidently. Now, there are other ramifications that will result from this string of Athenian victories, and chief amongst those is going to be a waning of Persian support for the Spartan cause. I mean, nobody likes to back a loser, and the two key satraps, or Persian governors in the region, were Pharnabazos and Tissaphernes. And over time, both of these guys feel like, maybe throwing money at the Spartans is not such a great idea. So this potentially could undercut the entire Spartan war effort in Ionia. And so things are pretty tough for the Spartans. But, as is the case throughout this war, things will turn around pretty abruptly. And that turnaround begins in 406, when the tide does begin to turn against Athens. And there are some key events that occur. Uh, I think the most important is that the Spartans in 407 will appoint as navarch or admiral a guy named Lysander. And Lysander is, again, one of these characters that emerges out of this Peloponnesian conflict, who is very interesting in isolation. And if you put him in this context, where all of his gifts and talents can begin to influence events, then you do have the potential for some explosive developments. Lysander was born of a impoverished noble Spartiate father and likely a helot mother. So he fell into a status called a mothax. And he was, however, allowed to make his way up the chain, attend the agoge, and make his way up the chain. But we might imagine that his unconventional background, that may have lent itself to the development of an unconventional outlook. And so, number one, we have Lysander being appointed as navarch or admiral. And by now you guys know that the Spartans were not traditionally a sea power, a seagoing power. It's going to require somebody with an unconventional frame of mind to really make Sparta into the type of sea power that could successfully challenge the Athenians. And Lysander is just such a person. Now, even before he goes into action, what he has to do is reconnect with the Persians. So in the spring of 407, Lysander leaves Sparta and makes his way through the Aegean to the area where the Spartans had their naval headquarters at Miletus. And he makes an important decision right away to shift the main Spartan naval base away from Miletus, which was south of the island of Samos. And if you remember from a few minutes ago, that's where the Athenian main fleet was located. And for the Spartans to move northward, and remember, the Spartans were keenly interested in controlling this area here, the Bosporus and the Hellespont area, those choke points by which they could stop the grain shipments, the Athenian grain shipments, from leaving the Black Sea area. So what was happening, though, was because the Spartan naval base was south of Samos, anytime the Spartans sent ships northward, they would be intercepted by the Athenian fleet and would be destroyed. So Lysander decides, well, we've got to move north of Samos, and that's where we'll set up shop at Ephesus. So again, right away, he takes command of the situation and makes some shifts in placement and strategy that will prove fruitful in the future for the Spartans. But he makes an even bigger coup when, at the same time, Lysander is appointed navarch by the Spartans. King Darius II, who is king at the time, decides that Tissaphernes and Pharnabazos, they aren't doing such a great job as satraps. I'm going to send my youngest son, Cyrus, to take control of this entire area. And Cyrus and Lysander have a meeting, and they hit it off right away. And Lysander is able to convince Cyrus not only to continue to support the Spartan effort with Persian gold and help maintain a Spartan navy, but Cyrus also agrees basically to double down, to give raises to all of the rowers in the Spartan fleet. And I should point out there's an economic angle to this because there's a lot of labor out there waiting to find out who the highest bidder is. A lot of guys who want to get good jobs, good paying jobs as rowers, they know that they can choose between the Athenians and now the Spartans. So the fact that the Spartans are paying top dollar, if you will, does cause a lot of rowers to either leave the Athenian fleet and head towards the Spartan area and take up work as Spartan rowers. So pretty soon, Lysander has the resources and the manpower now to begin to expand his fleet. So that is a key development, because again we have to remember that for a moment there, with the return of Alcibiades to the Athenian war effort, it looked like the Spartan effort to combat the Athenians at sea would wind up a total failure, and then who knows what'll happen then. So we have for a while Lysander laying low in Ephesus, not wanting to seek out battle with the Athenians until he feels his fleet is ready, because of the fact that he's got all these new rowers and ships are being built. It'll take a while. Now, what'll happen next is we've seen the Spartan fortunes begin to recover. Now we're going to take a look at the Athenian fortunes begin to wane. And this, of course, will have negative implications for Alcibiades. Now, what will happen at the Battle of Notium in 407, late 407, we will see that Alcibiades, who is technically in command of the fleet there, leaves his position. And he goes to an alternate location to coordinate broader strategy with some of the other Athenian admirals who are not in that general area. Now, the problem is Alcibiades leaves in command of the fleet not an experienced admiral or even a captain, but his own helmsman, somebody we would equate today as a non-commissioned officer, a petty officer. And he trusts this guy, and he leaves him in command of the entire fleet, and he tells the guy, I think his name was Antiochus, he tells Antiochus, whatever happens, don't go out and seek battle. Sure enough, as soon as Alcibiades is gone, Lysander decides to send some ships out to see if he can lure this fleet out into the open, where he's going to spring a trap. And sure enough, this guy Antiochus takes the bait, and it turns into a real debacle. And the Athenian fleet is defeated at Notium. And this breaks the string of good fortune that the Athenians had been experiencing, but also, in a way, more importantly, Alcibiades is blamed for dereliction of duty, we would call it today, and is basically exiled from Athens. So he loses his position. The Athenians ultimately will lose a very experienced and effective commander. I mean, whether or not you like Alcibiades, he was one of the best that the Athenians had, and now, once again, his services are no longer going to be available to the Athenians. So this sequence of events surrounding the Battle of Notium is going to have very far-reaching implications for the Athenians. Now, even more serious for the Athenians is the events of late 406. Now, when we get into a tragedy called the Battle at Arginusae. And Arginusae is up here. And what has happened now is the Athenian fleet had been bottled up in Mytilene. There weren't enough rowers to crew the entire Athenian fleet. There were dozens of triremes that had no crews. And again, this is a result of that policy I mentioned a few minutes ago, where the Spartan rowers were all given a raise, and word got around the Aegean that if you want to make top dollar, go row for the Spartans. Consequently, the Athenians could not find enough rowers. So their fleet is bottled up on the island of Lesbos at the port of Mytilene, and a relief fleet is sent out from Athens, and this is the last gasp. The Athenians have scraped together enough resources and enough manpower. They even have slaves rowing, which is very unusual. But they managed to get together a formidable fleet, and the plan is to sail to Mytilene and break the other Athenian ships out of their siege, and then confront the Spartans. And this they are able to do, and the combined fleet now of the Athenians takes on the Spartans just off the coast of Asia Minor here at the Arginusae Islands. And the Athenians will wind up winning a victory, but over the course of the pursuit, as the Athenians have destroyed some Spartan ships and they are pursuing the fleeing Spartan fleet, some of the damaged Athenian triremes are kind of floating there, and then a storm comes up, and long story short, a lot of Athenians clinging to the wreckage of these damaged ships are drowned, and in a way, more importantly for the Athenians and their spiritual beliefs, the bodies of the dead are not recovered. And the generals are blamed for this. The Athenian generals in charge are blamed for this, and they are put on a very contentious trial back at Athens. And this is a big scandal, and it is, again, one of the black marks against the Athenian democracy that critics of the democracy would point to, because what happens is there are 8 generals in total. 2 of them do not return to Athens after the battle. They recognize that somebody has screwed up, and that the relatives of all these dead sailors are going to want revenge. So 2 of the sailors, 2 of the admirals don't go back to Athens, but the other 6 return, and they are put on trial. And it is a very unusual and unfair trial, because one of the demagogues, the Athenian demagogues, kind of the rabble-rousers, who wants to scapegoat these Athenian generals, decides that they should all put on trial at the same time, rather than giving each of the 6 generals an individual trial, which was the way it was supposed to work according to the Athenian constitution. That process is circumvented, and all of the 6 generals, even the 2 that are missing in action, so technically all 8, are put on trial, and they are all found guilty and are all sentenced to be executed. And the 6 who had returned to Athens are executed, and the other 2 are sentenced to death in absentia. So it was a devastating scandal for the Athenians, and it shows again that sometimes emotions run high in a democratic environment. Now, the military implication of this is that the 6 generals, plus the 2 that had fled and avoided execution, were amongst the most experienced generals in the Athenian navy at the time. So, in a stroke, the Athenian assembly has deprived itself of some experienced commanders, just as things are heating up in the Aegean. So as the campaign season opens for 405 BCE, the Athenian navy is commanded by some rather substandard figures. Again, the political trial as a result of the Arginusae scandal has resulted in the best and most experienced of the Athenian commanders being executed or exiled. And again, this is a real self-inflicted wound that the Athenians bring upon themselves. So as 405 opens, those Athenians that are in command of the navy are rather timid, and they're rather lax in their discipline and their procedures. So that the ultimate end of the Athenian navy, and leading to the end of this conflict, occurs at a place called Aigospotamoi, right here along the Hellespont. And in 405, the Athenian fleet has gathered and has taken up a base of operations here. But they haven't been following proper procedures, and most of the ships are beached on the beach. And Lysander, the Spartan navarch, the Spartan admiral, gets word of this and decides to take advantage of the opportunity, and he swoops in with his fleet and basically surrounds the Athenians and forces their surrender. And over 100 triremes are taken into captivity. I think 10 do manage to escape, but this is the end of the Athenian navy. And from there, Lysander will then choke off. If you see where Aigospotamoi is here, this is one of those choke points. And Lysander is able to deny the grain shipments coming out of the Black Sea that the Athenians have become very dependent on. And with this lack of food and lack of navy, the war effort can no longer be sustained. And the Athenians will negotiate a surrender with Lysander in 404. So this 27-year-long conflict is finally at an end. And what a conflict it has been. The twists and turns and the ups and downs of both sides. Who would have anticipated that it would end in this way? But it certainly does. And of course, things do take on a very unfortunate spin in domestic politics in Athens, as you might imagine, resulting from this defeat. Now, what I'd like to do is briefly take a look at one measure of fallout from this defeat, and also bring one of the great figures of Greek civilization into this discussion. And in your assigned reading for this unit, you will get a background on the Socratic philosophy that the Athenians are known for. And while I don't want to cover that in this lecture because I'm already going pretty long, I do want to wrap Socrates into the context of events that we've covered thus far. And you can see here that after losing the Peloponnesian War, it's no surprise that the Spartans will abolish the Athenian democracy, and they will mandate that Athens be governed by oligarchy. They even handpick the government. The government will be called the 30. There are 30 prominent Athenian oligarchs who agree to basically collaborate with the Spartans, and these 30 oligarchs very quickly grow to be hated by the rest of the Athenian population. And there is a real division in Athenian society between, as we saw back in 411, there were a lot of prominent Athenians who were not big fans of the democratic form of government. And when the 30 Athenian oligarchs take charge of Athens and are basically bolstered by a Spartan military garrison, they take some very unpopular measures. Now, one of these 30 oligarchs was a guy named Critias, and he so happened, as a younger man, to have been the student of the philosopher Socrates. Now, Socrates, I'm sure you are somewhat familiar with him. Socrates was interested in moral philosophy. He wanted to discover the principles that would lead to living the good life. Good is defined by what we would refer to as virtuous. As a young man, Socrates was very much taken up with, I guess, what we would refer to as an early form of science. He was interested in, as a lot of the pre-Socratic philosophers were, in discovering the nature of things, natural phenomena, and things like that. But as Socrates grows older, he becomes rather obsessed with finding truth. He wanted to find the true nature of all things. And he developed a method called elenkos, which was a type of cross-examination method in which he would busy himself throughout the day asking his fellow Athenian citizens such things as what is piety, what is virtue, what is truth, what is beauty, what is justice. He would ask people that randomly as he came across them in the marketplace, or in other venues. Now, Socrates got a reputation as being somewhat of a pest, and his method of cross-examination was rather annoying because he never let you go until you wound up contradicting yourself. So you wound up feeling foolish every time you talked to Socrates. Now, Socrates never wrote anything down. We know a lot about Socrates primarily through his chief pupil, Plato. But also the Greek historian Xenophon was also a student of Socrates, and Socrates also makes an appearance in some of the comedies of Aristophanes. Aristophanes pokes a lot of fun at Socrates and his methods, but Socrates himself never wrote anything down. But we do know enough about Socrates through these other sources to know that many upper-class Athenian youths really became enamored of his method and his teachings, and of Socrates himself. And Socrates, almost the way some scholars have described it, it's almost like a cult with Socrates as a leader. And what is annoying to the families of these youths who have fallen under the influence of Socrates is that these young kids, these young males, young boys, are using this method, this cross-examination method, this elenkos method, at home. And it's making some of the elders look and feel rather foolish. And of course, so Socrates gets a reputation of undermining the traditional sources of authority in Athenian society. And it looks like he is beginning to corrupt the young because he's making them act contrary to how young people are supposed to act. They're questioning their elders, and to the Athenians, this is a type of taboo that you don't do. And also, by undermining the youth, by corrupting the youth, Socrates also looks to be shredding the fabric of democracy, because again, a lot of these young people tended to be of the upper class. And there is a sense that Socrates, in some of his remarks, made it clear that he was not a fan of a type of government in which the average person, without any kind of philosophical knowledge or understanding, could be placed in positions of authority. And his pupils begin exhibiting this type of elitism in which they feel like you should have a type of government by, as Plato would put it in the Republic, philosopher kings. So there are, again, a number of troubling aspects about Socrates from the perspective of the average Athenian. Now, the 30 oligarchs don't last very long. Very shortly after the Spartans withdraw their military garrison, the 30 is overthrown, and by 401 BC, the full democracy is restored. Now, the official policy of the restored democracy was no reprisals. This is a society that has been wounded both by the war and by the post-war infighting between the oligarchs and the rest of the population. So there is an attempt to heal these wounds by discouraging any type of reprisal or revenge. But we get a sense that perhaps Socrates does get caught up in the restored democracies wanting to prevent a future undermining of democratic principles. And as Socrates had been the teacher of this guy Critias, who was one of the 30, he was the most notorious of the 30. So Socrates is accused of, nominally the charges were corrupting the young and for impiety. There was a sense that Socrates was not showing the proper respect for the traditional gods of Athens. And this was a feature of a school of philosophers called the Sophists, who again attempted to explain things rather than the gods did it. Look for natural phenomenon to explain, what was happening when it rained or whatever. So Socrates was wrapped up with these sophists as being kind of a highbrow critic of traditions and the traditional religions. And again, he had been associated with this Critias guy. So when the democracy is restored, Socrates will find himself on trial for these two crimes of corrupting the young and impiety to the gods. And our best accounts of the trial of Socrates are through four of Plato's dialogues: the Euthyphro, the Apology, the Crito, and the Phaedo. And again, I don't want to go into too much detail here, but Socrates, of course, will defend himself, and he will point out, an earlier occasion in 406 when those generals, after the Battle of the Arginusae, those generals had been unfairly tried en masse and then executed. Socrates actually had been on the committee that had to debate whether or not it was constitutional to try these 6 generals all at one time. And Socrates had spoken out against it. He said, this is bogus, it's unconstitutional. So Socrates reminds the jury that, in a way, he feels like he's being railroaded just like those generals had been, and he had stood up against the mob then, and he's willing to stand up to it now. And this does not really make Socrates that many friends. Now, Socrates will ultimately be found guilty. He will be sentenced to death, and although he is given the opportunity to escape, he refuses this opportunity and chooses death by drinking. The form of execution is to drink a cup of poison of hemlock, and he agrees to do this, and he does. And ever since, it has been debated whether or not this trial was fair, or whether or not Socrates had somehow been his own worst enemy. He does display at times a rather arrogant streak throughout the trial proceedings. And it's interesting to note that at his trial, he is found guilty by a majority of the vote, but then when it comes time to sentencing, Socrates is given a chance to address the jury, and again, he has a tendency to speak arrogantly to them, and more of the jury will vote for the death penalty than had originally sentenced him to a guilty verdict. So he was provocative all the way to the very end. Now, he is considered a martyr to inquiry and philosophical freedom, and along with the trial and execution of the generals after the Battle of the Arginusae, the trial and execution of Socrates stands as a second really big black mark against the democracy. And it's interesting that in the 1970s, a journalist, author, Irving Stone, wrote a book in which he tried to dust off the case against Socrates. I will spare you all the details, but it is an interesting read, in part because Stone comes to the conclusion that Plato was no big fan of the democracy, and the way Plato treats this event, this trial and execution of Socrates, was in many ways specifically designed to give the democracy a black eye. By showing it to be basically comprised of an intolerant, hysterical mob. So, that is kind of an interesting contrarian view of the traditional look at Socrates as being a philosophical martyr. But I think we can all agree that he was in many ways, the last casualty of the Peloponnesian War. And from this point on, we'll take a look at what the Spartans will do now that they have achieved victory and a temporary dominance over the rest of the Greek world. It won't be very long before the Spartans will take the place of the Athenians as sort of the imperial master of all the other lesser Greek states. And we'll take a look at how the Spartans conduct themselves and how long Spartan dominance, or as it's called in Greek, Spartan hegemony, will last.